The chair now recognizes Dr. Lara Hansen.
Good morning, and thank you, Ms. Chairwoman, Ranking Member, and the committee for inviting me to speak about climate change in our public lands. I've had the honor to visit the Hill twice before to talk about climate change. First in 2004, when I was pregnant with my son, and I talked about the hopeful work I was conducting around the world to improve ecosystem management in the face of climate change, a discipline called adaptation. I urged the Senate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and keep climate change to less than 2 degrees Celsius. In 2007, I was invited back to testify on the effects of climate change on marine ecosystems. My son was now 3. I applauded Congress for the existence of several bills to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I repeated the need to keep climate change to less than 2 degrees Celsius, and I added a request for the creation of a national adaptation policy with an extension agency to provide technical support. The following year, 2 colleagues and I co-founded EcoAdapt in order to bring the skills we were supporting internationally to the United States so our own country could become more durable to the insults of climate change. A decade later, EcoAdapt is now a team of 12 supporting the innovation of adaptation approaches across the United States. We see a growing number of people incorporating the realities of climate change into their work, but not nearly to the extent necessary. We host the biennial National Adaptation Forum, and in 2017 we had over 1,000 attendees. We're a country of 325 million. Certainly we need more than 1,000 people doing this work. Our country is utterly unprepared for the scale of this challenge. In every one of your districts, there are decisions being made every day, not only on public lands, but also on private lands and in our communities that are vulnerable to climate change. Not considering the implications of climate change will result in investments in infrastructure, management, and protection that will not garner the anticipated outcomes. Instead, we will end up spending additional funds to rebuild, risking community members' lives and livelihoods, and doing damage to our environment. Explicit consideration of climate change in our actions today is vital for our lives tomorrow. As lawmakers, you have the power to do something. From my 20 years of professional experience in the field of adaptation, I recommend the following. 1, create a national adaptation policy that requires the consideration of the impacts from and to climate change in evaluation of funding and permitting for land use activities, and quite frankly, everything else. 2, create a national climate change adaptation and mitigation extension agency. This would provide technical support to public and private land managers and everyone else at the federal, state, and local level. 3, require the protection and management of our public lands with an awareness that the climate is changing. This means the agencies entrusted to protect our public lands must evaluate the climate change vulnerability of ecosystems and the actions proposed on these lands such that they can act to reduce that risk. This needs to be part of how we do business. We must ensure that we're protecting adequate and appropriate space for ecosystems to function under changing conditions, including protecting refugia, connectivity, functionality, and employing forward restoration. We must support our land stewards with the staff and funding to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of management and give them the ability to make management decisions that prepare us for future conditions. We must manage lands for the long term to maximize our rate of return, which will be realized as access to clean air, clean and plentiful water, flood control, wildlife habitat, improved mental health, spiritual opportunities, recreational enjoyment, and long-term jobs. Our public lands must not be managed for quarterly profit margins. 4, reevaluate acceptable levels of non-climate stressors on our public lands. From roads or invasive species to overharvest or eutrophication to industrial chemicals from gas extraction and mining or chemical fire suppressants, the impact of these stressors can be compounded by the manifestations of climate change. And of course, since that child I spoke about at the beginning of my testimony is now a teenager, I know that I often have to repeat myself to get action, such as emptying the dish rack. So here it goes. Number 5, keep global climate change to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Actually, we now know that 1.5 degrees Celsius is the more prudent target. We need to reduce our national consumption and production of fossil fuels to stop making the problem worse. The cost of inaction is unaffordable for us and our children. I am delighted that Congress and this committee are again taking up the issue of climate change. This time, let's do something to increase the likelihood of good outcomes. Let's act now. Thank you.